I'm Jenny. I'm really happy to give a talk at this meetup on an upgrade handbook to Rails 8. I originally gave this talk at Rails World this year, so it might be familiar for folks who went to that conference. And it was also really nice to see some of you that did go to the WMVR RB meetup before Rails World in Toronto. Before I get started, just wanted to do a quick introduction. I am in the Rails infrastructure team at Shopify. I'm also based in the downtown area of Toronto, and I like to change up what I like to do in my free time. I think last time I gave a talk, I was talking about going to trying new foods and like going to restaurants, but right now I've been more kind of like spending time not learning how to cook, but trying to cook new recipes. So I've recently been to Asia, and like to cure my food depression, I wanted to like try and cook the foods rather than planning my next trip there. So I just wanted to share that. So back to Rails and technical things. The talk starts off where I am now in Toronto. The city has almost 3 million people, and it's not including the greater Toronto area. There's a lot of suburban areas. So this means that there's a lot of people, which means that there's a lot of people needing to get to a lot of different places in the city. More than 600,000 rides on the Toronto subway, also known as the TTC, occur on an average day. I take the TTC on a regular basis, and I have a gripe with them. It's never on time. It doesn't really feel safe in the evening hours, and it's sometimes closed when I want to take it. So it's very sad. And a lot of people in the city think the same. There's a lot of news articles, a lot of tweets. And I dug up some data. On average, the TTC records an annual average of 20,000 subway delays. That means that there's over 50 subway delays per day. And 14% of transit rides are considered on time. So that kind of correlates to how my experience with the TTC. So the bigger question is, why is the experience so awful? And I'm glad to get like a little, some folks in Toronto also think the same. So I don't know, really happy that we have our conjoined, I don't know, suffering. So why is it so awful? Let's hold on to that thought. We'll get back to this. I'm supposed to be talking about Ruby on Rails and not the Toronto Rails here. So some things that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the Rails upgrade process and the benefits of doing so. We're going to work on upgrading an app to the latest release, and I'll also be sharing how Shopify mass upgrades Rails across our apps in the company. So how the heck does someone upgrade Rails? The Rails Guides gives a great overview on how to upgrade a Rails app to the next minor version. I'll be doing a quick walkthrough for those who aren't as familiar. So there are some prerequisites before you start to upgrade Rails. You need tests, so to prevent unexpected issues going into production. Tests are the first line of defense, which can tell you what parts of the app may need changing because of a change in Rails. Make sure you have the minimum Ruby version required. So for Rails 8, it'll be in Ruby 3.1. So if you're not on Ruby 3.1, you need to upgrade to 3.1 before you upgrade to Rails 8. The first step of the actual upgrade process is to move to the latest patch version after your current version. So if you're on Rails 7.1, you will want to move to 7.1.4. And you can do this by editing the version in your app's gem file and running bundle update. Then you will need to fix tests and deprecated features. And then you would want to move to the latest patch version of the next minor by bundle updating again. So if you're on Rails 7.1.4, you will want to move to 7.2.1. This seems pretty straightforward so far, like updating another regular gem dependency. But when you upgrade to a new major or minor version of Rails, you would need to run the update task, also known as bin Rails update, and this will help you with the creation of new files and changes of old files in an interactive session to update to the new templates and defaults for that Rails minor. You may need to take some time to review the differences between the overwritten files to see if it's something that should be kept and it's something new that you would like to try, or it's removing something specific to your current application. And lastly, you would want to configure framework defaults. So one of the files in the update task produces a new framework defaults file, as you can see here. So it has a lot of commented out configurations, and you would need to uncomment each one and make sure they work in your app. And then once they're all uncommented, you can update the load defaults to the latest minor, because you tested all of them, they all work. So now you can update the load defaults with your minor. So here are the summary of all the steps. Sometimes isn't the most trivial process. It takes a bit of time if there's broken tests, slew of deprecations. Gotta look through all of the files when you run app update. So why take that time to upgrade? Like, why do you want to upgrade to Rails 8 if you're on Rails 7? And this kind of relates back to why the TTC is so awful. One of the reasons why there's delays currently is that there are reduced speed zones. So this is because maintenance has been neglected to a point where track repair is required in those areas, and it's unsafe to go at a normal speed. And the busiest streetcar line in the city is closed from June this year to at least the end of this year for track and electrical upgrades. And the replacement buses are a lot slower. And I kind of opted into walking instead of taking that replacement bus. The TTC lives by doing big repair and upgrade projects when they have to, and they rely on quick band-aid fixes to keep on running. These upgrade projects causes more user dissatisfaction to an already poor rider experience. So what does better look like? In Japan, they're known for their efficient and reliable railways. They're reliable because they do maintenance and upgrades daily at night. So this keeps service running on time and safe, avoiding long periods of closure. So to be a first-class city, the city's infrastructure needs to be first class, and first-class cities tend to attract people and that are happy because they can move around fast within the city. And transit systems are just like Rails apps. If you don't upgrade Rails in your app and your version becomes end of life, you aren't getting backports of security and bug fixes in your app. So it's not keeping your app safe and up to date. It might be easier in the short term to monkey patch or create your own solutions to fix these bugs. But to a point, apps are forced to migrate due to one reason or another. So this app in Rails 3.2, Heroku just doesn't support that version anymore, and the maintainer is nervous that it will cause an upgrade will cause outages, and it'll spend a lot more effort. And like previous releases, Rails 8 is super exciting. There's many new features to continue to make working in Rails 8 a first-class experience. Some of the features include COML and solid queue by default, the Rails LSP, a built-in dev container setup, and more. And this will attract more developers and happy ones at that to the community. So to summarize, why should you keep your Rails versions up to date? It's to essentially make sure you aren't going to be the TTC of Rails apps. We want our Rails apps to be safe and reliable. We want to prevent costly large upgrades, and we want to promote a first-class dev experience. Now that we know how to do Rails upgrades and why they're important, I'm going to share some things that you may encounter while upgrading to Rails 8. The pre-release of Rails 8 was released during Rails World, and the stable version was released on November 7th, so just a couple of weeks ago. And many of the features in the Rails 8 milestone were released as a part of 7.2. So that means default progressive web application files known as PWA, dev container configuration, omakase Ruby rules by default, and many more. And the deprecations in 7.2 will raise warnings, which will be removed in Rails 8. In the Rails guides, they advise you to upgrade to 7.2 first before moving to 8. So you're probably wondering, what deprecations are there? What should I expect to be removed? And to make it a little bit more fun, we're going to upgrade an application from 7.1 and see what you could encounter in your apps. We'll explore interesting deprecations and framework defaults, so you'll know what to expect when you get your app one step closer to Rails 8. Before we get started, a little context on the app itself. I created an app that tracks TTC service alerts. So it scrapes the TTC alerts on Mastodon, and you can see the posts in this application. And it displays events using the post and mark if an incident is resolved or not. And on the dashboard, it displays the current active incidents, and it helps me figure out, along with the weather, if I should take the TTC, walk, or use a rideshare app. So yeah, that's the app. The app is on 7.1.4. And let's upgrade to the next minor by running bundle update Rails. And we run into some deprecations and some changes when we run into the test. One thing you might run into is changes if you're extending your Rails console. So to demonstrate this, I created a feeling lucky command. It does something you'll never forget. I'll run it for you. It doesn't have audio, I'm guessing, but that's fine. The visual should be enough for now. So typing the console, we're entering the console, and I have a feeling lucky command, and this is what happens. Yeah, so it does something that you'll never forget. Anyways, how I do this is I extend the Rails console methods with the feeling lucky module, and but doing so at 7.2 is now deprecated. This is because IRB introduced an official API to extend the console instead of you trying to hack within the internal parts of IRB. The API allows you to create helper methods and commands. A helper method should be used if you want to do an operation that returns a Ruby object, while a command should be used for like non-Ruby related things like utility operations and displaying information. So for my feeling lucky operation, I can define an IRB command with a category, description, and an execute method, and just register it to my console. It's a lot more cleaner than what I previously showed before. And it displays the category and the description in the help menu. Rails has migrated to use this API, so some requires might be deprecated if you're using them in your app or a gem that you use. So if you're requiring the helper or app file, you should change them to require the Rails console method file instead. Another change in 7.2 is that there's a change in the active job queue adapter configuration. Previously, if you set a queue adapter, the adapter would be used in some tests, but for integration, action mailer, and active job tests, it will still use the test adapter. This caused weird behavior if you expected the application adapter in all your tests in previous versions of Rails. But in 7.2, the adapter is now consistent through all tests now. This may break a couple of tests if they were built around the test adapter. So for the system test, it uses a certain queue width, which is something only the test adapter supports. So you can see when we run the test that it fails because it requires a test adapter. But you can just set the adapter to the test adapter in the test configuration if you want to easily patch this. In 7.2, when you run tests, Rails will now notify if a test doesn't have an insertion. This is good since not having an insertion could indicate that a test is broken. Like in this example, I want to test if a resolved event record has a resolution record associated, but if there's no events to begin with, then the cert is never reached and the test should be fixed. Sometimes you have a test just to make sure the operation that you're doing doesn't error out. Like this console test where I want to make sure that I can run the feeling lucky command without it exploding or saying it's not implemented or not found. You could just wrap a cert nothing raised to demonstrate that intent. The syntax of enums has changed too. So there's a deprecation that deprecates the use of keyword arguments for name and value and wants you to use positional arguments instead. This syntax is better as it prevents requiring underscoring option args to separate enum deprecations. So in here, previously you would need to still have the scopes keyword argument in, so that's not good. And lastly, not related to my app since it's quite new, but I want to call out that there's some last deprecation regarding to Rails secrets. Rails secrets is quite old. It was introduced in Rails 4.1, where you have a secrets.yaml file, and you can define secrets per each environment for development, test, production. And 5.1, Rails introduced encrypted secrets, and when enabled and when you ran the setup command, it will generate a key along with an encrypted version of secrets.yaml. As you can see here. But in 5.2, DHH introduced a completely different concept of secrets, which are called credentials. It allows better secrets management by allowing different credential files per environment. So previously, every environment secret was in one file, so credentials makes it easier to separate those. And the Rails secrets has been deprecated for a while, and some of the features are slowly being removed. In 7.2, the read encrypted secrets configuration has been deprecated, and calling Rails application secrets have been removed completely. So if you're still on, if you're still using application secrets and not credentials, this is the time to migrate to do so. And you can get started by running the credentials edit command. Okay, so we're done with some general deprecations and changes. I'm going to quickly run through some notable file changes when the update task is run. You'll get a suggestion to configure Puma Dev, which is the golden path to develop multiple Rails apps locally, and a change to change the default number of Puma threads from 5 to 3. So there was a lot of discussion around what the number should actually be, and 3 was found to have a good balance of like throughput and speed/latency. And now you'll have a new public view of unsupported browser template. So in Rails 7.2, you can define what browsers your Rails app can support by setting allow browser in your application controller. So if you don't want to support a specific browser, you can now do so, which is good if like you don't want to support some old browsers. Nice. Let's go on to some new framework defaults. There's a new configuration to enqueue jobs after transaction commit. A common mistake with active job is that it'll enqueue jobs inside of a transaction, and that this isn't good because the job might run and before the transaction is committed, and this can result in some real errors if the transaction doesn't end up being committed and roll back, the job is still ran. So now active job will automatically push enqueuing these jobs to after the transaction commit and drop the job if the transaction is rolled back. And lastly, another default is that YJIT is enabled. YJIT is Ruby's JIT compiler that is available since Ruby 3.1, and it's been shown to improve latency or speed by 15 to 25% in Rails apps. And in Shopify, we have that enabled too, so that's good. And yeah, that is what you can expect on your upgrade journey. There's a lot more changes that I didn't have time to speak here, but hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what kinds of issues you could run into when you start upgrading your Rails app. Now I'm going to go through how Shopify is able to keep up with these Rails upgrades across the company. At Shopify, we have hundreds of Rails apps outside of our core monolith. This includes internal apps and some customer/merchant-facing apps, like first-party apps to extend Shopify's functionality. So we have an app that allows merchants to sell products by bundles. And we also have an app to generate a logo for their business, which is pretty fun. And these are all standalone apps and not microservices for our core application. A few years ago, we had 20 different versions running on 500 applications. With so many different versions, it makes it difficult to estimate upgrades across the company and get a handle of security issues from older releases. There was no expectation for apps to upgrade on a regular basis. And as mentioned before, the more versions that an app is behind on, the harder it is to get them up to date. And for devs that wanted to upgrade their apps, the steps were kind of unclear. And without proper education, many just upgraded the gem that was given by a dependent bot without running the update task or migrating low defaults. And some people told the team that it was just a painful process. So there are like two areas of improvements that I kind of summarize is that how can we make sure all of Shopify's apps are up to date, and how do we make these Rails upgrades easier for developers that own these applications. For the first point, we introduced an upgrade calendar for Ruby and Rails upgrades. With the upgrade calendar, we expect that apps run on the latest minor each year. And for apps that fail these expectations, we start a deletion process or escalate to higher ups to create an upgrade plan for the apps that we just can't delete. This eliminates the ambiguity of when to upgrade and allows teams to plan for upgrades and allocate enough resources to do the upgrade. And it also gives a good opportunity for teams to audit if applications are still used or impactful. If it isn't, instead of proceeding with the upgrade, we can just start the deletion and archival process. For the second point, I think it's the more interesting point. How do we make Rails upgrades easier for developers? To make the steps clear, we created an internal gem called Rails Upgrade. Remember the Rails Upgrade guide mentioned near the beginning of the talk? This gem essentially is a command line script help to automate each of the upgrade steps outlined in the Rails Upgrade guide by running Rails Upgrade when you install the gem. It'll figure out what next action is required to upgrade your app, make the changes, and provide any context or follow-ups needed before the changes should be merged. The gem consists of steps similar to the one in the Rails Upgrade guide. Each step will have a met and a meet method to determine if the step was already met, and if not, meet will make the changes and commit it to the repo. So I have a step that we have in the gem called upgrade to the latest patch step. So met will check if the version in the gem file log versus the latest patch version by fetching it from Ruby gems. And for Meet, we have a version upgrader instance that will update the gem file and run bundle update on Rails. One interesting step that we also have is the auto-correcting deprecation step. As we saw when upgrading from a 7.1 app, there were deprecations that could be resolved by a simple syntax change, or some configurations could just be deleted. So instead of wasting developers' time to manually solve them, we could statically autocorrect them. For example, we have a deprecation from Rails 6.1 to replace URI parser to URI default parser. We use the syntax tree to correctly identify if there's a constant URI that's calling parser, and we'll replace it with the constant URI default parser. This is an example output of the Rails upgrade command being run. It shows the steps being run and outputs the changes it committed. To leverage this gem, we hooked it up to an application called SolidTrack. So SolidTrack tracks all of Shopify's Rails apps and their versions. It runs the Rails upgrade command and opens PRs, and does so on a weekly basis. So this is what SolidTrack looks like, and you can see the overview of the versions of the Rails apps we're on. And when you go to an app like SolidTrack itself, because SolidTrack is a Rails app, it shows when an upgrade run was called and its result. A run is a GitHub workflow that boots up the application and runs the Rails upgrade command. And it takes the output and the commits and opens a PR. And this just makes it easier for developers to know what to do to correctly upgrade their Rails app. So with the upgrade calendar, the Rails upgrade gem, and the SolidTrack application, we now only have 400 Rails applications, so 100 less than what we had before, which is quite a lot, and they're all on Rails 7.1 or later. And developers at Shopify are grateful that these Rails upgrades are simplified and more clear. So to recap, on this whole talk, we have gone over the Rails upgrade process and why they're important, some fun things to look forward to fixing when you upgrade your app to the latest version, and shared how Shopify upgrades at scale. And you might want to take some pointers back to your own organization. But if there's one thing you can do from after this talk is make sure your application is up to date. As Eileen mentioned a while ago during one of her talks, if you're running Rails 3.2, your problems are 10 years old, and you don't want to be the TTC of Rails apps. Trust me, it's not fun. I wanted to shout out the people that worked on making Rails upgrades better at Shopify, and the people who helped me with this talk. And yeah, thanks for listening, and happy upgrading if you are planning to do so.